Plus, she was being a real DPW.
You know, Freud, now that Kathy isn't here, what is a DPW?
You don't want to know.
Yes, I do.
And here, again, feeling for Kathy, they're basically making fun of her behind her back. They're like, oh, that's why we call her a DPW.
Okay,
Matilda's like, oh, tell me what that is. What do you call her that?
I know this is childish and somewhat revolting.
That's okay.
But DPW stands for dehydrated poop worm.
And it's a dehydrated poop worm.
Dehydrated poop worm.
Now, Nick, off screen, you did say that you misheard this.
I thought it said dehydrated poop whore. And I was like, God, Freud.
This was on Nickelodeon?
Hi, that's disgusting.
Told you.
Hey, all you cool pigs and piglets. Welcome back to another Just Play It podcast with your host. I am James.
And I'm Nick.
And we have a not-so-special treat for you this week. We decided to pick a movie that I'm pretty sure 99% of people have never heard of. Nick, so far in this podcast, you have pretty much supplied the answer of I've seen this movie, or I've seen this movie once, or it's been a long time. In full confidence, I am sure you have not seen this movie. Is that true?
That is correct.
Oh my God, finally. Can you tell the audience what movie we are watching this week and reviewing?
The movie was, or is, the released straight to cable television's My Brother the Pig.
This movie was directed by Eric Fleming, who doesn't really have any other notable credits. It was written by Matthew Flynn, who also doesn't have any notable credits. But this does star Scarlett Johansson, Eva Mendes, and Judge Reinhold.
Which is surprising to me, because when I look at the director and the writer, and I say, wow, they have zero credibility. They've literally done almost nothing else. This is their claim to fame, which is kind of sad. But then you see the
we
stars.
We don't know that
in
yet.
It. I know that yet. But let's be honest here. This is a very young Scarlett Johansson, a young Eva Mendes, and I don't know what was going on in Judge Reinhold's career at the time, but not young.
He's a guy that you would recognize from a bunch of movies. I recognize him as Neil from the Santa Claus.
Yeah, he is definitely Neil from the Santa Claus. A lot of rom-coms. He was in Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, his time was definitely the 80s.
And Beverly Hills Cop, directed by Martin Brest, who got shut out of War Games like we discussed a couple weeks back.
It all comes full circle.
Now, do you want to know why I picked this movie out of thin air? Or how this movie came about? Okay.
I'd love to know.
So, I was in San Diego. I was at my friend Kevin's bachelor party. And we had this Airbnb. It was the next morning. Everybody comes out, sits down on the couch, and someone just turns on the TV, and this old-looking movie is on. No one's really paying attention to it. We're all just kind of on our phones, scrolling through Instagram, whatnot, texting. And I look up, and I see Eva Mendes, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess, this is an Eva Mendes flick. I've never seen this. And then freaking a young Scarlett Johansson shows up. I'm like, what, ScarJo? What are you doing here? And there's a pig. And I'm like, what the hell movie is this? What is this? Where did this come from? And I look it up, and lo and behold, it's a movie called My Brother the Pig. And I thought, well, goddamn, if I ever start a podcast with Nick and we review movies, I'm adding this to the list because I have to know what this movie is.
Well, here we are.
Why it exists, and what is Nick's opinion on it.
We get to do this.
This is a bit of a mystery of a movie because it has a little bit of a convoluted release debacle. Can you kind of enlighten the audience on why we may or may have not heard of this movie before?
Yeah. So what I could gather from basically an interview with the director and writer, was essentially this movie was written, and actually back in the early 90s, I think around like 91, 92, before Babe, actually, the pig, before the big pig momentum we had going in society. And what ended up happening was it got shelved It kind of, the script, it was owned by a company, by a group, and it just kind of continued to get shelved. And then eventually it got made in 1997-ish, maybe 98. And people just kept holding on to it. They couldn't find a good release window, release schedule, where to release it alongside of. Just kind of got released to Nickelodeon eventually on TV. It didn't really get a box office or anything like that.
Yeah, I was trying to find what weekend this was released in theaters or if it went straight to video, and I was having trouble figuring that origin. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Everybody needs to know about My Brother the Pig.
They're going to know about it today. Now, with this obviously not being a wide release, it's a bit of a mystery on its budget and if there was any sort of take-in or residuals or anything. Nevertheless, this movie is rated to a certain degree. It does have a very low audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes critics, I believe, doesn't have any reviews. The audience score is a 31%. So this movie qualifies as a flop.
That it does.
Enter the Flopbuster series.
Flopbusters. Time to flop. Worse than LeBron James.
This is where Nick and myself will look at movies that flopped critically and ask the question, did this movie deserve to flop? And we will answer that question at the end of this discussion. Now, to set the rules real quick, Nick, what's the agreed upon rating a movie needs to be minimum to not be a flop? Is it 6.5?
I'll call it, it's really hard, right? Because I think it has to come with a certain amount of star power and hype. If an independent film just turns out to be like a 3 and you didn't have high expectations for it, it's hard to call it a flop. But I'll say with this cast,
Black and white answer for the Flopbuster series, setting the ground rules.
I think it's a 5.
Oh, a 5.
I think just middle of the road 5. If you get above a 5,
not 5.5 or
no,
6.
Just 50%, yay or nay. Kind of like the tomato meter, right?
That's pretty forgiving.
Yeah,
that's pretty forgiving. Well, I think the tomato meter's 60 or 6.5.
Yeah, you're right. It is a 60. But
let's call it 60.
I'm going to call it a 5 for me.
Well, no, we have to settle this now because this will be the standard going forward for Flopbusters.
I think we could each have our own.
No, that's going to confuse the audience.
We have independent scales for how we rate our movies. That's fine.
How about 5.5?
You're treating this like a negotiation. And I love it. 5.5, sure.
Okay, great. 5.5 is the minimum score it needs to have from us as individuals or as an average to bust the flop myth. So if I give this a score of a 5.5, that means I'm busting that Flopbuster myth, baby. And I'm calling it not a flop. So we will see at the end of this podcast if I do, in fact, decide if this was a flop or not. And we will see if Nick decides if this movie deserved to flop or not. With that, Nick, actually, I need you to read this logline because I have a comment about it.
Sure. Being a teen is tough enough for Kathy Caldwell without having to be the target of her little brother George's constant practical jokes. Then their parents leave for France and George is magically transformed into a pig via some of their nanny Matilda's ancient rocks.
Okay, so I thought you wrote this logline.
No.
But I did, in fact, check IMDb, and this is legit, their logline.
Yep.
It was the sentence where it says, George is magically transformed into a pig via some of their nanny's rocks. And I thought that was just a matter-of-fact logline that you wrote up.
Nope, this was what they wanted to sell the audience on. This was it.
Well, call me sold because I pressed play. And I think it's time to jump into some plot talk.
Plot talk.
Plot talk. This movie opens up with some super dated cartoon opening of the contentious relationship between a sister and a brother.
The logline says he's a practical joker. This kid is a problem. This kid is a menace. It's not okay.
He's an impractical problem, to say the least.
So we open up to a monologue of Kathy, who is our main protagonist, who's played by young Scarlett Johansson, about how unhappy she is at home. Her parents don't understand her. Her brother's terrible, and she just wants to be in Paris. This monologue is her diary to basically this made-up French guy.
This made-up French guy that she's writing to doesn't really come into play a whole lot. It kind of is there in the beginning, maybe once halfway through. Don't get married to this idea. This won't be a theme throughout the movie. But she is obsessed with France and feels like she belongs there. But instead, she is stuck in Los Angeles, California with her middle-class family. Her younger brother, George, who is played by Nick Fuko. I don't know how you say that last name. How would you take it? Oh, okay.
That's what I'd say. Yeah. We haven't heard about him much because this is the only movie he ever did.
Yeah, maybe this was a one and done for the Fuchs. So he plays a prank on Kathy, his sister, by tying a mouse to her leg while she's sleeping. Guess what? The next morning she wakes up screaming, going crazy, and this poor mouse is just bouncing around from the string tied to Kathy's leg. And then the father, played by Judge Reinhold, finally decides to take care of the problem and rips off Kathy's pants, and then she runs away screaming. Bit of a interesting introduction here.
It was. I was really disappointed in the parents' reaction screaming. Like, clearly your kid has a pet mouse, and you know that this is the pet mouse. So everybody just needs to take a step down and calm themselves and deal with the fact that there's a mouse.
Not a good reaction by the dad or the mom. They were all freaking out. Mouse is freaking out. Kathy's freaking out. It's a big freak out.
And we'll get into how bad of parents they are here in a little bit.
There is a quick heart-to-heart scene with the father and Kathy about their differences with the brother and how she needs to give him a little bit more patience and she'll learn to love him, blah, blah, blah. And basically that conversation ends with Kathy saying she'll pay for a DNA test because she doesn't believe that this little shit brother is related to her.
Fair.
And that is mirrored by the next morning.
So the following morning, the parents, they're packing for a trip to Paris. Obviously, we know Kathy wants to go to Paris, so she's a little jealous. In the meantime, while all this is going on, George is being a problem. He's throwing Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch into his cereal bowl with Nesquik strawberry milk, making a mess, plops a Rice Krispie treat in there. Parents don't care. It's not like this kid is a sneaky problem. He is out and proud problem for everybody in that household.
But Nick, I mean, would you eat that bowl of cereal?
I don't like strawberry milk, no.
I was going to say, that's the one outlier that I'm not down with is the flavored milk powder.
Yeah. Like the cereal's going to flavor your milk already. Why are you adding other flavor? I've never been a fan of flavored milk, to be honest.
No, not at all. I think the Fruit Loops mixed with the Captain Crunch, the Rice Krispie treat is a little bit too of an extra delicacy I don't need. It
would never dissolve. The marshmallow bonding would never dissolve.
It might just get harder and become like a cereal brick.
That's exactly what it would become. Yeah.
You'd have mushy cereal, like the cereal would get softer and the Rice Krispie treat would just get brickier.
It's the exact opposite of what would happen to the cereal Rice Krispies.
Right, and that's just how science engineered them.
Yeah, I don't have any say in this. This is just the world we live in.
We didn't check the facts on this. This is all just theories and speculation.
Correct.
Enter the overtly Hispanic nanny, Matilda, played by Eva Mendes. Now, the first thing I noticed was, wow, she's putting on quite the accent.
Yeah, that was my thought too. Like, it was very clearly she was a Hispanic nanny.
Which is like kind of like already a tough look, you know, white family, Hispanic nanny, overtly Hispanic, played by an actor who we know has an American accent, can speak Spanish, but we know she doesn't talk like that.
We've seen enough of Eva Mendes.
Dude, I've seen Too Fast, Too Furious at least 88 times, and that is not how she speaks.
Not at all.
This is only 2 or 3 years before that.
We are also introduced at this time to George's friend Freud, played by Alex D. Linz. He was in Home Alone 3. Funny enough, he was Scarlett Johansson's brother in that movie. So they had a little bit of acting history together.
Yeah, and that came out before this, right?
This was, I think, it was weird. It sounded like this was shot.
Sorry, that's a loaded question because of how this movie got released.
Yeah, I think they were already working together on this, and then it got couched, and then Home Alone 3 came out, and so
that makes a lot more sense because Alex D. Linz looks younger in this movie, but It came out after Home Alone 3.
Yeah. I think that's how the timeline worked. This was shot before but released after.
This kid also plays Max Keeble in the kids' movie Max Keeble's Big Move, a movie I have not seen. Maybe we'll add it to the list.
You don't need to do that. We get introduced into the whole cast of characters here. It's one of those houses, those like early to late 90s sitcoms where people would just waltz into the house. Yeah, just through the back door.
Just waltzes on in.
Yeah, it's just the kitchen's open. Anybody can just come on in and be part of the conversation. And it's also clear that Freud is also a problem.
Freud adds to the problematic chemistry that is George, the brother. There's also a weird subplot that is brought up once that has to do with a character named Kimberly Woodry. And she calls Kathy on the home phone and says that she wants ice cream. Now, was she asking her to go buy ice cream and bring it to her party?
I think maybe Kathy worked at a store that sold ice cream and they wanted to pick it. They
did not explain that at all.
It sounds like a whole part of the script that may have got cut and they forgot about that line still being in it. But it was kind of like this Mean Girl thing where she was like, told Kathy, like, hey, I'm having a party this Saturday. Kathy was like, oh, I'd love to go. And the girl's like, oh, no, I'm not inviting you. I just want to make sure that there's ice cream there.
Yeah, that was very confusing. That must have been something that hit the cutting room floor. And when this movie came out, the editor was probably like, shit, I didn't take out that ice cream line.
Yeah. But I also feel like it being a younger family comedy, girls that age maybe seeing it with the family, they'd be like, I relate to that. Girls are mean. So I feel like there's a lot of that in this movie where you could tell that there's just kind of these tropes that they play to the audience, kind of like the family audience a little bit, that don't really fit into the movie, which I give it a pass for because that's what the movie is.
It does add to the bad parenting because the dad basically hears, oh, you're invited to a party? How fun. And then Kathy's like, not really. And then he's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
So the parents leave the house, but they don't leave for their trip.
Yeah. Like they're going to get some extra stuff before they leave.
I thought they were out skis. I thought they were on their way to France, but Eva Mendes needs to go to Kinko's. Scarlett Johansson's in her room on a very dated computer on a very dated website. It's a French website, and there's 3 links. There's a map of France. That's the first link. The second link is French recipes, and then the third link is French boys. What link does Scarlett Johansson click on? French boys, because she loves them.
And it just comes up to like this shirtless hunk, a guy you'd see maybe like a Fabio character on the front of like a romance novel.
While Kathy is gawking at these French boys online, Eva Mendes, aka Matilda, asks Kathy to watch the boys while she goes to Kinko's. Kathy gets distracted by the French boys. Meanwhile, there is a super snack tornado happening in the kitchen between George and Freud. And I gotta say, there's this awesome crap. It's not, the song is not called, it's not called Knock on Wood. Like that's technically
not it's Impression That I Get by the Mighty Mighty Bosstones.
Right.
I picked it up right away. I was like, love this song.
Because it's clear.
It's not their song.
Maybe I should go home to my own dysfunctional family. Get over here, you DPW.
And by the way, Michael Giacchino did the music for this movie. This guy has done so much stuff, and he even won an Oscar for his work on Up.
Oh, great theme song.
Tons of Pixar movies, tons of Marvel movies. He just did Spider-Man No Way Home. He actually just directed Marvel's Werewolf by Night, which was a short, and it was pretty awesome. And he does the music to this movie, and one of my first notes was love the music. I love the introductory music over the cheesy cartoon opening, and then when he does this Impression That I Get score, I was like, oh, I'm tickled by this. I'm digging the music so far.
But what's not cool is what's going on during this score.
No, there is hella 90s snacks being thrown around in the kitchen by George and Freud into a Frankenstein bowl on the kitchen island.
It's like Oreos and ice cream and every sweet. There were Butterfingers in one of the drawers. Like this house apparently it's a whole supermarket aisle of junk food.
Well, apparently Kathy works at the store, so she's got the hookup.
It's all coming together.
That popsicle logo in the freezer brought me back.
The Push Pops?
The Push Pops, but like just that yellow box with the blue and red popsicle logo brought me back.
Simpler times.
That was a delight to see.
So they make this bowl and they call it the frozen thing. And they stick it in the freezer. And this is like their crowning achievement, is this frozen thing.
Creatively, yes, call it the frozen thing.
So they end up getting caught. And also the punishment is light. Matilda says, clean it up. Like, make sure it's cleaned up. Kathy is wildly upset by this. And so she actually takes a bunch of Polaroids to show her parents when they get home.
Yes, like I said, they didn't leave for the trip yet. They like left in a cab and then came back for whatever reason.
Yeah, it was weird. So the parents are now leaving for Paris. Kathy is pleading with them, saying, please look at these photos. Punish your son. He is a maniac. Please. And the parents are like, no Nintendo for a week. I don't know. What do you want me to do? Kind of thing. Meanwhile, Freud and George are like jumping on the fence. Like, it just clearly, again,
acting real disrespectful.
Mighty disrespectful. So this kid should be in a boarding school, and yet he's at home terrorizing his family. We fast forward 9 days that the parents have been gone. George and Kathy haven't spoken in that time frame. And Matilda doesn't, she's just trying to keep the peace as the nanny. But Kathy has other plans. She's feeling a little vindictive. They're going to try and make her feel bad for fighting back once in her life against this hurricane of a human being. And so Kathy wants George to get into trouble by going and playing in Matilda's room. And Matilda's room is like she's a live-in nanny, so that's her like special space. So George enters the room. There was some weird glowing purple lights before he even goes into the room. So we're like, oh man.
20 minutes into the movie, and Emily and I are sitting here watching it, and we're both saying, how is he going to turn into a pig? And then as soon as we saw the purple lights, we're like, okay, here we go. Here comes the magic room.
So George enters the room carrying the frozen thing.
I have to say something, though. This made me crack up. We were wondering how he's going to turn into a pig. And then as soon as we're introduced to Eva Mendes's character, who is a very, I don't want to say stereotypical, her accent is just super extra. She's the Latina nanny. So as soon as the purple light shines from her room, Emily says, quote, is this going to be a racist thing? I mean, if they tie it into her culture, then yes.
Well, we'll get to that right here. So George enters the room with the frozen thing, and he's snooping around. He's just kind of wandering around. And he finds a spell book and like these ancient crystal rocks that start glowing. And he ends up dropping the frozen thing onto the ancient crystal rocks. And then all of a sudden,
it starts melting.
We see these terrible late 90s effects of like flashing lights. There's lightning. There's smoke. It's a whole production. No one in their house really knows what's going on. And poof, George turns into a pig just like that. And now we're like, okay, now we can get started with this movie.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Was this a better transformation scene than last week's watch of 2003's Hulk?
No.
This was not better than the gamma accident scene? Because I beg to differ.
I mean, we didn't even see the transformation. We saw like overlay lightning effects, flashing lights, and then like a smoke machine poof, and then a pig appeared. I wouldn't even call it a transformation scene.
Well, I'm comparing it to the scene in Hulk when it's the iPhone shot and then the screen stretches and it's a freeze frame and the editor puts a white and black lighting effect on it. At least they had practical effects in the scene.
I mean, a $10 smoke machine is not quite a practical effect, but agree to disagree on that one.
I mean, practical. It's in the shot. The Hulk just froze the frame and the editor just turned up the brightness and turned down the brightness. It was atrocious.
I mean, they're both awful. I'm not trying to defend one over the other.
Team Pig on this one.
All right. Everybody finally realizes something happened in the house. Matilda gets some shiver down her spine or something. She knows something's wrong. Matilda puts it together that George has now become the pig. Tries explaining it to Freud and Kathy. Freud buys in 100% the second he hears it. Kathy obviously needs some convincing because she's a rational human being. And after some convincing, the pig can go and pick up stuff they tell it to. Like it's listening to him, right? It's George. And so after some convincing, it basically works. And then Matilda essentially confesses to being a witch from a long line of cursed witches. And her grandma, who's also apparently a witch, is the only person who knows how to turn George back. And lives out in Mexico City. So this threw me for a loop because I didn't realize this was going to take place in Mexico. I thought we were going to have like shenanigans around the city kind of thing. I didn't know we were going into Mexico.
I didn't know this was going to turn into a road trip movie to Mexico City.
With the pig. So they decide they got to go to Mexico. They got to take mom's car.
They get in their convertible Volvo.
Sweet car. I think it's called like Mom's Joy or something like that.
Mom's Joy.
And Freud jumps in and they're like, you can't come with us. We're going to be gone for multiple days. Like your parents won't allow that. And Freud basically says, yeah, me and my parents, they say like we need a break from each other and I can come back when I'm ready. So terrible parenting is just a theme throughout this.
This whole neighborhood has kid problems.
And that brings us to the good old-fashioned border smuggling scene.
Freud, hide George now.
How? He's big.
Just use this.
Good, get down.
So I'm really glad they addressed this, though, because when they were doing that, they're going to Mexico. I was about to say, like, the one thing about when you're going into and out of Mexico is, like, you can't bring, like, animals, like livestock animals, or, like, fruit or food. And so they actually, like, that was a point. Now, I don't know if anybody here had a passport.
I think that was before you needed one, right?
I don't know. I didn't travel to Mexico in the 90s.
We traveled to Mexico in the 2000s, and you did need a passport.
This version of Mexico also seems a lot safer.
The border guard is played by Paul Renteria. Funny enough, this guy also plays a border guard in the movie Due Date with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis. This scene at the border, this seemed like some sort of... Not sure if this was supposed to be funny or if this was a little bit of passive-aggressive racism by Kathy. She looks at the guard, border guard, and says,
Hi, nice to meet you. I love tacos.
And she's trying to blend in because Matilda's backstory is that she's bringing her family, which is Kathy, Freud, and this mystery kid in the back, who's George the pig, but he's dressed up in clothes. She says that she's bringing them to their family.
Buenos días, señor.
¿Dónde va?
Well, I'm taking these children to see their parents in Rosarito.
But Kathy suspiciously just looks at the guard and says, I love tacos. Just the first of many passive-aggressive comments that Kathy will make to people.
She's a passive-aggressive. I mean, she's a teenage girl. You kind of get that. I don't know. Again, kind of plays into the audience thing. Now, the one thing that is kind of weird to me about this is not a light trip. It is over 30-hour trip to go to Mexico City.
It's a 32-hour drive from Los Angeles
to Mexico City. Like they make it look like they're just going to like Tijuana, which is right across the border.
No, Mexico
City's like in the
deep in there.
It is south Mexico.
They do leave and drive overnight, and then the border scene is in the daytime. But it must have been multiple days. Must have been like the day 2 on the trip.
At least.
They've burned at least minimum 4 days in the car before their parents come home from France. They get through the border pretty easy. They don't even check the car. It's a convertible, and the guard can literally see this thing in the back and just doesn't decide to get out of the booth and search it.
It looked like there was like a famous person or maybe like a Mexican politician behind them who's telling them to hurry it along.
So pretty lucky circumstances there.
A lot of convenience in this film. Now, I will say, at this point in the movie, I'm very sympathetic with Kathy because she seems to be the only person who's really understanding the gravity of the situation. Matilda seems to be taking this pretty lightheartedly. Like, oh, maybe we could turn it back. We'll have to drive down to Mexico. We'll see. She's not freaking out. She's not having a panic attack. Freud is just like, sure, I'm going along with it. Kathy is like freaking out, and everybody's like, stop freaking out. Why are you freaking out? Freaking out is the only rational thing to do in this situation. So I'm very sympathetic to Kathy, but we end up getting to Grandma's house outside of Mexico City in this pretty remote village. I'd say dirt roads. So they're at Grandma's house in Mexico, and Kathy has this dream of when her brother was brought home from the hospital as a kid, as a baby. And because this was something she talked with her dad about. And then her getting in trouble for him becoming a pig. She wakes up and in the morning, and she's getting real bitchy with everyone. Again, I think it's warranted. And she wants her brother back to being a boy, but we'll find out it can only happen during a full moon. Conveniently, that's tomorrow night. So
hell yeah.
That's good to know. And she gets basically accused of only wanting her brother back so she doesn't get in trouble. Again, Matilda doesn't seem to be worried about getting in trouble for keeping ancient witch crystals in the house. Kathy and Matilda have a fight. It's a little harsh. She does insult the grandma's cooking, which is like, you didn't have to do that.
And the other moment in here was when they were speaking Spanish with each other, and Kathy's like, they're talking about our futures in Spanish. I'm like, okay, Karen, you need to pump the brakes. Again, some passive-aggressive racism. I feel for your situation, but just calm down, all right?
I sympathize with Kathy here.
No, I know you.
Somebody needs to tell me what the fuck's going on. Instead of just like talking in Spanish. Because I think what they were saying in Spanish is like, oh, this girl, what's she like? Why is she freaking out? Like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Your granddaughter brought ancient crystals into my house and my brother is now a pig. I'm sorry. I'm with Kathy on this one. I would be annoyed as fuck with everybody, with my family for letting my little brother basically be the bane of my existence. For my nanny, who treats my little brother like a prince, has hex crystals in the house, gets him turned into a pig, and then we have to go to Mexico. This was not part of my plans. And then I sleep in a hut in some like dirt village. Like I'm a little upset.
Which is weird because they say that the grandma lives in Mexico City, which is a major city.
No, outside of Mexico City. They do say outside of Mexico City.
Okay. It just seemed there's not one car in this town except for that Volvo, Mom's Joy, and the tour bus.
Which I don't know why a tour bus is there, but Kathy and Freud head out to find ingredients for this special soup that needs to be made for the transformation ritual.
Correct.
For George. Kathy, meanwhile, is just allowed to hang out in the small town of Mexico by herself.
She is abandoned in this Mexico village, just left to wander the streets. Yeah, the trio of Freud, grandmother, and Matilda decide, you know what? We're just going to give you your space and you can go wander off. Goes with the theme of not responsible parenting or bad guardianship.
Terrible guardianship.
So she's left to walk around the streets of Mexico, and she does encounter these local girls whose names are fucking something. What was their names? Mercedes and Annie. The older sister said she was Mercedes, and the next credit in line is Annie, so I'm going to go with Annie.
Gotcha.
So there's a whole side plot where they take her into their personal home and hang out with Kathy, and she finally gets some well-deserved girl time, some well-deserved friend time. She's finally having a good time.
Yeah, these girls...
She met some nice people.
They speak English. They know all of the American TV channels and films, and they're like, yeah,
because
we have Dish.
They brag about having a dish.
Dated.
That was a big deal back in 97, whenever this was shot.
These are the first people in the film to actually be nice to Kathy.
That is true. Her own family is pretty rotten.
Matilda and Freud get to the store where they need the ingredients. It's run by Matilda's brother, conveniently. She seems very surprised by this. She has no clue what's going on with her family, apparently. Grandma didn't say, go down to the store, see your brother. Your brother works there. Anything like that. This was not come up, so she's very surprised. To be honest, this is kind of where I started to really, really like Freud. He is kind of the carries the movie. He has some funny one-liners.
Absolutely.
You know, like they're speaking to each other in Spanish, and he goes, "Hey, is this one-liner come in English? Or does this?
Hey, does this family reunion come in English?"
Nice little one-liner. It's a funny one.
He's got some zingers. That Freud.
His favorite one is going to come up later for me.
Can't wait for it.
And apparently, getting these ingredients is taking a long time.
Hours. Everyone at this point is slowly fading away into their own side story. And
yeah.
George and Freud's side story is they start swindling tourists and making monies on the street, with George performing tricks because Freud can talk to him. Freud also has some sort of sixth sense ability of being able to communicate with George while he's a pig. I don't know if he's talking out of his ass saying, George is saying this, or George is feeling this. I don't know what the rules are for transformation movies, but when you turn into an animal, This movie says you retain the ability to understand English, but obviously your pig mouth cannot speak in English.
Yes.
So it's like, but George can now speak animal because all animals can speak to each other. We'll see that later play out in this movie. But they are making money as entertainers on the street for these American tourists. So Matilda and her brother are working on the recipe. Meanwhile, after the street entertainer scene, George suddenly sprints to a butcher shop.
Yeah, he just runs off and gets trapped in a carniceria.
Which is not a smart thing for a pig to do, especially when you don't belong in a pig body or belong in Mexico or don't speak the language.
They honestly should have kept the pig in like a pen or a cage of some sort. I don't know why they're bringing him along on all these errands.
I don't understand why George ran away.
Neither do I.
When we get into nitpicks after the movie, which we'll see how many stack up. But this is a big one for me. Why would you ever put yourself in that position as a pig and as a boy trapped in a pig's body? Why would you sprint to the butcher shop?
You're looking at me like you want me to give an answer.
That's exactly what I want.
I have nothing for you. Convenience, plot convenience. Another bad thing happens. Meanwhile, the car... Okay, so first off, I'm not really understanding this. So
the only car in town.
The only car... Well, apparently there's a tow truck. There's a tow truck that tows away the only car in town. They have a tow truck just in case any vehicle ever enters this town, it will get towed away.
They're like, no cars in this town. Get them out.
It's not even like there's curbs. It's all dirt streets. What do you mean you're not supposed to be parked there? There's no signage. There's no rules here.
This is a loading zone, ma'am. Please move your mom's Joy Volvo from my spot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really weird. I'm also confused because George and Freud go off to find Kathy. Matilda and Freud drove, like we're on a highway to go to the store when they were talking about the DPW, dehydrated poop worm moment. So are they all still in the same town together? Why did they get in a car and Kathy just wander around the town? It looks like
maybe the grandma's house was a little bit outside the town and then Kathy just wanted to blow off some steam and then walked back into town. Maybe took a good 45-minute walk into town. And Matilda and Freud were like, we're not walking. We got a pig with us.
You could be right. I don't think it's up to the viewer to decipher this information.
There are points in movies when you want the viewer to investigate certain things and figure them out and be smart. This is not a way to do that. This is just an annoyance for us.
Yeah, it's just a confusing moment for me.
We have to compensate for the writers and the editing and the general filmmaking decisions. Us as the audience need to make up reasons why things are happening. And there's a lot of that in My Brother the Pig.
So we get back to Kathy, and she's having fun with her new friends, Mercedes and Annie. And they're doing a makeover. They're doing makeup. They put on these dresses. They're just having girl time. Again, Kathy is finally happy. And Kathy comments on a picture of a hottie. There's like a guy in a frame. She's like, who's this hottie? It's the sister's dead brother.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, it was a moment. She's like, I'm sorry. Like, it's all right.
Boner killer.
Yeah, that was like, ooh.
Ew.
Ooh. And then all of a sudden you see on her face, Kathy has this like family moment. Like, oh, family.
She does go Dom Toretto in that moment.
Yeah. She's basically like, we gotta go find my brother.
She's like, oh fuck, I forgot. My brother is a pig in Mexico.
These sisters also just believe it. Maybe they know of the grandma and her witch magic. Maybe they're like, oh, it happens all the time.
Dude, I got a conspiracy theory for you. Maybe the brother's not dead. Maybe the grandma, Abuelita, turned him into an animal because he crossed her. I think there's a dark side to My Brother the Pig. My grandma, the murderer.
What if all the livestock in this town were just the bad children?
You mean the livestock like at the butcher shop?
Like at the butcher shop.
Maybe there's some sort of magnetic force that tracks transformed animals to that butcher shop. That's why George ran to the butcher shop. See, these are the reasonings we're making up as the audience members because they actually want us to figure this out on our own.
It's a much better storyline.
But on the surface, these friends do just believe it. Doesn't take not 1 second of convincing.
Yeah.
It's like, this is better than watching Dish.
Cut back to Freud. Now, he's on the rescue mission. Now, he's the only one who cares about George, apparently.
He's the only one who knows that George is in peril.
He has this funny little scene where he basically says, my parents say I have to write a priority list. But he doesn't call it priority list. He calls it something else. I can't remember what it is.
All right, Freud, calm down. Think it through, just like Dad says. Think it through. Make a minority list. What are my minorities?
He takes out this pen and he's writing it on his arm. He's like, find George. Find
George.
Kathy. Find
2.
Matilda. You know what I mean?
Kathy.
He writes it on his arm. It's this cute little moment.
3.
I'm just liking
Back to
Freud
Burns.
more and more as this movie goes on.
He is putting the movie on his back, single-handedly.
So he bumps into Kathy eventually and comes to my favorite one-liner by Freud in the entire film, where she's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I'm very desperate at this point. He goes like, George is locked up by some monster in a butcher shop, and you're walking around the streets looking like RuPaul. And I thought that line, because she's like in that elegant dress.
Dude, she got leveled with that one.
Freud had the best lines. He was just killer one-liners. Was a big fan of him from this point forward.
I wrote down, Kathy explains to Mercedes and her sister about how great France is. Dead brother, comma, reminded of George, comma, run to Freud, period, RuPaul comment. Freud's got jokes, is what I wrote down.
So we come up with this plan.
He tells the girls that George is in the butchery. And
He's going to be somebody's lunch tomorrow.
they do a stakeout, and do they stay overnight because they're in the same dresses they were in the day prior?
Time means nothing in this film.
Like, they can go home and change, but I guess they decide to be street kids and sleep over in the sidewalk.
It's a lawless town. We'll see that more here in a minute.
They get a whole stakeout of the butchery, and they devise a plan to save George. Kathy and Mercedes are sent in as the distraction. They are basically coming in and ordering something. They want fresh chickens. And the younger sister is up on the roof as the signaler. The butcher, who is displayed as this very gross and creepy guy, always wearing a dirty wife beater, has a thick mustache, always sweaty. What is always in his right hand is a meat cleaver. So he's kind of a guy you don't really want to run into. And of course, he is the one holding George hostage.
Unknowingly, too. Everybody else in this movie has believed them up to this point. Why don't you just explain that your brother's a pig and just buy the pig?
Because it would go with our conspiracy theory of he's in on it with grandma and their whole child abduction via animal transformation scheme.
I believe this.
So walk us through this rescue mission.
The rescue mission's going on. It's not working because children are coming up with this. First off, this butcher shop looks so unsanitary. You should never eat the meat that comes out of it. Plan fails. Kathy goes back to try and jiggle the lock, but she's not really doing anything that bad. The butcher, however, is not okay with this in any way, shape, or form.
He is unhinged.
And he decides that now is the time to chase a teenage girl through the streets with the meat cleaver.
A meat cleaver.
No one in this town seems to mind. The whole town might be in on it, James, the more I think about this.
This is honestly shaping up to be a horror story.
Because eventually you'd think someone in the town would say, please stop chasing this adolescent girl with a meat cleaver through the town.
Or, some sort of law enforcement figure would come up and say, hey, you can't
no
really...
Law enforcement. Might just be the tow truck driver. He's security for the town.
He's the biggest authority figure in town. Because
Judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah, he towed the Volvo and said, not in my town, lady.
So he chases them all throughout town with the meat cleaver. Mercedes and Kathy split up. He chases Kathy. And
of
she's
course.
Like, why is it always me he chooses? And it's like, I don't know, maybe because you're the one white girl in Mexico.
Maybe he's also racist.
He could be.
This comes my favorite part because while he's chasing Kathy, Freud is now telling George to speak with the animals to break out of the butchery. There's an animal holding pen where these cows and bulls and pigs are being held at. So George has to communicate with the bull, and Freud says, tell him, he's going to be someone's lunch later if we don't get out of here, or he's going to be in someone's tortilla later if we don't get out of here. Again, Freud with the jokes. So it cuts to the bull busting out of the wood wall, and all the animals escape. Now we catch up to Kathy, who is now cornered in an alleyway by this deranged butcher with a meat cleaver and his sweaty wife beater tank top. George runs into them, the pig, and looks up and sees a pot on the balcony.
Oh, terracotta pot. Pretty heavy.
It's up on the second story. The butcher has already cornered Kathy. Kathy's staring at the butcher. The butcher's staring at Kathy. George comes in. He sees them staring at each other. He looks up. He sees there's a pot on the second story. He goes all the way up the stairs and then has to navigate through a room. Meanwhile, the butcher is still just menacingly staring at Kathy. They must have been having a stare down for 2 minutes before George finally knocks the pot over the balcony and boom, bullseye, hits the butcher in the head.
Again, heavy terracotta pot. It would do some serious damage.
Definitely put Eduardo in concussion protocol because he just got domed by a terracotta pot. But I just thought it was hilarious. They were just staring down each other until that pot came down.
But everything works out well. They're walking back to the car to go find Matilda so they can go back home.
Yeah, we get all back together. We get the Volvo back. Matilda, meanwhile, went after the tow truck driver on some sort of scooter and got the Volvo back.
This was a weird subplot.
It was inconvenient, but we're all back. We got the Volvo, we got the pig, we got new friends, and we're back.
And
at
the butcher
Grandma's
returns
house.
Before we get to the car. He
does.
He shakes off the brain trauma, chases them. They run, they jump in the car. They're telling Matilda to go. She's like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" And they're like panicked. They're in a frenzy because they're getting chased down by this murderous butcher holding a meat cleaver. It's the right reaction. Again, I sympathize with a lot of the reactions in this movie because I don't know how some people are so calm in these situations. They jump in. Finally, Matilda sees it and they drive off. In the meantime, the car drives off. Matilda's brother's just standing there. The town people are standing there. The crazed butcher barely misses getting to the car. And then what? He's just standing there in the middle of the street. Everybody's staring at him like, what the fuck was that? Matilda's brother should be like, dude, did you just go after my sister's car with a meat cleaver and the kid she's with?
I'm going to fight you.
They also took these two sisters out of town with them, apparently, because they all jumped in the car together.
Child abduction is a major theme as well. Got no plans for the rest of the day, kid? Guess what? You're getting in the Volvo and joining our adventurous shenanigans.
This kid's a pig. Welcome to the club.
So we're back at Grandma's house.
This is my least favorite scene.
I was going to say that it was very convenient that we skipped the big middle part of the major conflict in this movie, because it starts out with Kathy hating her brother. There's not really any sort of progression throughout the movie of her learning a lesson. It really is just that turning point of the dead brother picture. And she's like, family, I got a brother. She apologizes to Matilda, which was owed, even though I know you're team Kathy and she has very rational reactions, but she did owe Matilda an apology for yelling and disrespecting her as an adult.
Or disrespecting her grandma, really, was the only one. Because Matilda doesn't act like an adult. She doesn't deserve that kind of respect, in my opinion.
Okay, shots fired by Nick. Nick is not team Matilda. I am.
So here's my issue.
Eva Mendes is hot.
No disagreement with me, friend. My issue is this. Kathy goes to reconcile with Matilda. Matilda needs to say she's sorry, too. I feel like she's been gaslighting Kathy this entire fucking film, making her feel bad about everything. Again, you brought ancient rocks into the house that put a hex on a child and turned him into a pig, had to drive everybody, steal the mom's car, drive them down to Mexico. This girl just got chased by a butcher with a meat cleaver, and you're not going to take a shred of responsibility from this? Fuck you. I'm not apologizing. We're shit. This isn't my fault that any of this happened. I am just trying to be a teenage girl at home. My brother is a little terrorist in my house, ties rats to me, destroys the kitchen. I'm trying to hang out. He's basically throwing Hot Wheel cars at me. I'd say go to the nanny's room. Go to the nanny's room and mess it up if you want to mess something up. And there just happens to be ancient mystery rocks in there. I'm sorry, that's not on Kathy.
Well, apparently it is because she apologizes. She also apologizes to George for pretty much not being understanding of his misbehavior, which is also not really that owed.
What's to understand about this kid being a little shit?
Not much.
I'm sorry for not being more patient while you tied rats to my legs while I was sleeping. I should have not cared.
She admits to Matilda that she did coax George into her room, but I think you've said your point. That's nothing to apologize for.
If I tell somebody, if you and I are 13 years old and I tell you to go into the garage, and you're not supposed to go in the garage, but I go anyway, and there's just a bunch of power tools and saws and dangerous items in there, not locked up, just open for all to see. The door's not locked. It's just an accessible room in a house that is not yours, Matilda. This is not your home. This is irresponsible. Lock those up. Why are they out are you using them regularly? Why are they out on the dresser? Why aren't they like locked away in a chest under your bed? Oh, I have children in the house. I'm just going to keep knives out on the counter all the time. Nothing bad can happen. I'm sorry. If you're an adult, you have to be more responsible than the children that are there. Sorry, the kid was being a kid. Also, if anybody would have disciplined George once in his fucking life, Kathy wouldn't feel the need to lock him and coax him to go into that room. If he was just 15% more behaved. The antagonist in this film is terrible authority figures. That's the antagonist of this film. It's terrible authority figures, and then that gets gaslit onto a teenage girl.
I agree. But instead, she apologizes to George.
And now we're going to climb up a big rock shaped like a pig to save George.
Well, it's called Coyote Mountain, but it does resemble a pig very strongly.
It's a pig.
It's a pig mountain.
They have the crystals. The crystals go into this soup. The soup is essentially movie theater nacho cheese.
I looked at that quote-unquote soup, and I thought mustard.
Yeah, yellow. Yeah.
This is a 60-gallon trash can of mustard. It's very globby.
And nobody eats it, but they pour it on them.
They pour it on they put the pig in George's clothes so he won't transform naked. They pour real-life mustard on this real-life pig on the set.
Onto the clothes.
Onto the pig. George is put up on a slab. They put the mustard soup on top. Meanwhile, Freud looks up and sees some sort of weird figure stalking them from above, having the power of streaming, rewound it and paused it and thought, oh, that's weird. That's a human male, adult. Who's that? And in the next scene, it's revealed the fucking butcher shows up. He followed these guys to Pig Mountain. He is deranged.
This guy.
this
fucking guy.
He has a fucking problem with the Caldwell family.
Yeah, he cannot let this one go.
Honestly.
He doesn't even go back to his shop and reconcile that all his animals have escaped. I think that they just ruined his life, and now he wants his revenge. But he's missing his meat cleaver this time.
He has nothing. All he wants to do is cause harm to this family.
But the thing is, he doesn't care about the family. He attacks the pig boy.
He does grab the pig, specifically, off the slab. So you're thinking, oh no, the transformation ritual's going awry.
Here's the thing, though. The butcher has no idea what is going on with this pig. He doesn't know that's his pig. He doesn't know his pigs from not his pigs. Otherwise, he would have known that George wasn't his pig in there. He had no idea this pig existed. He had no idea that that's what these kids were after. They just thought they were trying to rob him or something. Oh, no, it wasn't even that. Kathy accidentally knocked over like 4 jars, and that's what sent him into a blind rage.
Oh yeah, she dropped some like pickled jars. He was oh hell no.
And this is where he loses it.
Get my meat cleaver. The butcher fucking shows up, gets George off the slab. George runs around the corner as a pig. And we're thinking, crap. But then at this moment, the butcher's on the magical slab. The moon is coming. The full moon is coming down, and it's shining through a hole in the pig mountain, pretty much the eye hole of the pig, which is kind of funny because this is essentially a 2-dimensional mountain. Because no matter what angle you look at the pig eye, it's always open and full.
The moon was also setting uncontrollably quick.
The moon shines through the eye hole. The butcher is now on the slab, and Abuelita and Matilda take it upon themselves to dump the mustard soup on top of the butcher as some sort of vendetta against him. A violent act of witchery against this butcher. Granted, but I don't think to that extent, because what happens to this butcher, Nick?
The butcher turns into a bird? I think maybe a vulture?
He turns into a vulture.
So can this ritual revert people from turning into animals and also turn them into animals?
Which makes you think, couldn't you just make another Frozen thing back in California and then dump it on the mystery rocks again?
Yeah, I don't understand.
If these transformation rituals are interchangeable, why go through the trouble of driving 32 hours to Mexico City on a race against the clock of your parents coming back from their France trip?
It's inconsistent. That's all I can say.
Well, anyway, this guy's life has changed, and George turns back into a human.
And does something that pisses me off. He crawls out from behind a rock and he's like oinking. And everybody's like, oh, what? He's still effed up. And then he's like, no, that's hello in pig. Ha 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 ha. It's like, you little prick. All right. You haven't learned a lesson. You haven't learned a lesson. You're still being a little shit. Thank you would have sufficed. Like, oh my God, that was wild. Thank you for helping me. This is my issue. No one learned a lesson. And the only person who evolved was Kathy. And I think she evolved for the worse because she was gaslit into changing.
Yeah. So they get back in the Volvo. They drive back to California. Classic race against the clock of the parents who are in a taxi on their way from the airport. And there's a weird scene with the taxi guy is basically talking about his butt problems.
Yeah.
He says, oh, I sit on my butt all day, so I have a lot of issues. I had a doctor as one of my passengers one time, and he told me to rub warm, spicy mustard on my butthole.
I wouldn't take that advice.
I was like, that was interesting because that healing soup also looked like mustard. Were they trying to say something?
It's butthole mustard.
The answer's no. Butthole mustard. The gang beat the parents back home and have to do a fast forward montage of them washing the car because it's covered in dirt. And of course, the parents roll up with the weirdo taxi driver and find the kids with Matilda. Everyone's all in well. Everyone's fine. There is a scratch on the side of the car, which Kathy takes the fall. Now, what's your take on this? Being a big Kathy fan, she's just getting walked over this whole movie.
Again, the only lesson she learned was just to take the blame for everything and everything is her fault. I don't like that.
Well, you know what? Maybe she did progress because she's like, you know what? I live in an insane society, so I guess I just need to roll with the punches.
Just shut up and move on.
To lessen the blows on myself. So if anything, maybe it is a bit of a progression with Kathy because she understands the world she lives in, the systematic world she lives in, and just chooses to operate by the world's rules. It's a messed up message, but she does learn that lesson.
I guess so. The last thing we see is that George still has a little pigtail. That's a problem. That's going to come up later. Not in the movie, just in life.
It must have been when the butcher shoved him off the slab. The transformation didn't really complete there.
Yeah. Then they're all given a family hug, and he burps. Kathy goes, what else do you expect from a pig? And everybody, ha, 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 ha. The end. Again, this burp thing just shows me that this kid has not changed one fucking bit. Everybody's in a hug, and he just burps on everybody. This is where the dad needs to smack him in the mouth.
Multiple times in the beginning, when George was in human form, I figured this kid needs to get smacked across the face.
Yeah.
That would not fly in the Gordon household. It would definitely not fly in the Justice household. Holy shit. I would not want to be on the wrong end of a Mr. Justice slap. You know what I'm saying?
No. Trust me, no. So that wraps up our plot talk. That's the plot.
That is plot talk. Not a whole lot of plot there. This is the time when we usually jump into our nitpicks.
Nitpicks.
But Nick, I see you have a note here.
I mean, I didn't really put anything here. I mean, we kind of covered everything in the film, but it's hard to nitpick this movie. It's a little family comedy. They clearly didn't put that much thought and effort into the film. There's really nothing to nitpick for me.
It's just the whole thing is a nitpick.
Yeah, the whole thing is just inconsistent and a 90s family comedy where a brother turns into a pig. I mean, you can only expect so much out of it.
I have to agree with that. When we were talking through it, I did note down that I do have a little bit of a nitpick, and that is the pig recipe. Because this is the major plot device that transforms George into a pig. We translated the ingredients from the book, and they go as followed. And you can let me know if any of these are in the frozen thing. Rattlesnake, crow's feathers, corn kernels, pig's eyelashes. So those were the ingredients needed to transform into a pig, which this witchcraft book was opened up on. It was opened up on the pig page. It was right next to the dog. And these are the ingredients. I can't recall if any of those ingredients were in this frozen thing that was filled with Push Pops, Skittles, Snickers, and popsicles.
There was like a red rope in there.
I mean, if anything, maybe corn kernels. Maybe there was some popcorn in there. But all in all, I'm willing to bet there was no rattlesnake, crow's feathers, or pig's eyelashes.
I hope not.
Major plot hole there.
Again, I also wonder why this book was open next to the crystals. Like, is Matilda casting incantations on people?
Maybe, no, she absolutely could be a supervillain. But maybe just, I don't know, the American snack corporations are just super OP and just override witchcraft rules.
That's not the worst theory.
You know what?
About this
they
film.
do have a lot of ingredients in there. Maybe they're trying to say like, oh, you know how they say fecal matter can make its way into certain products? Maybe it's that situation. Maybe the smallest trace of crow's feather or rattlesnake made their way into a Push Pop or a Skittles Pebble.
Some pig eyelashes and some Oreos.
Yeah, not much nitpicks to address here. I do want to bring up a couple talking points though. So I'll start with this. I think we can both agree that there is a major life change for a character in the movie at the end when they turn Eduardo into a vulture. What happens to Eduardo? What are the repercussions from this Caldwell family vacation incident in Mexico City? I kind of need a sequel.
And is Grandma just going to keep her mouth shut about it? Or is she going to turn him back? She's complicit in this voodoo magic.
That makes sense, actually. You're kind of defending my point here, because maybe that she wanted to turn him into a vulture and figured, hey, I can turn him back at any point. He's a little bit of a violent problem right now. I can't deal with this. I'm going to turn you into a vulture. Come see me in the next full moon, and we'll do this again, baby.
It seems like they're playing God. And I don't like it.
It does seem like they are very irresponsible with no regard, literally, for human life.
So you're saying we need another movie called My Butcher the Vulture. What happens to his butcher shop? He just disappears from town. Everybody who used to get their meat.
All the animals are gone. His butcher shop is kaput.
Well, there was still food hanging up on the racks. Is this just going to be rotten meat?
But the pickle jars.
Does he have an apprentice who's going to take over the shop? Is he the only butcher in town? Where's everybody going to get their protein? These gringo kids just rolled into town and fucked everything up.
That's all I'm saying. The Caldwell family
upset the entire balance of this village's economy.
They do upset the ecosystem in this village. Oof. So that's why I'm asking, what are the repercussions? Like where are they now? My Brother the Pig, 2023.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
So you have a talking point as well.
Yeah, there's just a weird So was George, did he have like a pig brain? Because he was communicating with animals. He was doing pig stuff. Or was like he completely a self-aware human in a pig body? Because that sounds like a nightmare. It does sound like a horror film almost.
Well, if we dive deep into it, we could maybe discuss that the psyche of his transformation and his character, maybe it fluctuated between both streams of thought. So maybe at some points he was a human that was aware of the situation. And then at other points, like when he sprinted to the butcher shop unknowingly, like an idiot, maybe he smelled pig friends at the animal pen holding area in the back, and his pig instincts kicked in, and he's like, I got to go run to my pig friends. And then unknowingly ran to the butcher shop.
That sounds like a nightmare, a hellscape of having animal thoughts and human thoughts. And I feel like this movie should have taken a darker turn. It would have been a lot better.
Well, you want this to be like Animal Farm or something?
Sure.
For a family comedy, this is dark.
Yeah, let's get real.
Yeah, I don't know. Now that you asked that, it could be some sort of fucked up situation in the movie where he does have pig thoughts, and at the same time he does have human thoughts, and he can't control at what point he's thinking like a pig and what point he's thinking like George.
All I'm saying is it's an exercise in the break of the human psyche. And it's a heavy subject.
What the fuck is my brother the pig trying to say to me right now?
I'm confused. But let's see what other people have to say about this first.
Well, there's not a lot of reviews, as we discussed.
Rotten Tomatoes, the critic scores are not complete. There's not a single critic who reviewed this film.
Shame on them.
The audience has this at 31%.
Considered a flop.
Yeah, Metacritic, nothing. No reviews. And IMDb has this as a 4.2.
Yeah. What did we say at the beginning? 5.5 or a 6?
Yeah, 5.5.
With the limited information we have, we do know that this movie is a flop. And after viewing this movie, we will reveal if we feel that deserves to have that title of a flop.
Yes, we will.
We know this movie had trouble getting off the ground. I don't know what the behind the scenes was. I don't know who really greenlit this. But I'll tell you what, Nick, if I was a producer trying to get my brother, the fucking pig, off the ground, I would pitch it as a kind of a classic Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Freaky Friday, The Shaggy Dog, mythical mishap about a kid who gets turned into a pig. And we give it Disney Channel original movie quality, but you can say shit and ass.
I'm very much in the same boat with you. I just said it's Freaky Friday with Babe.
Yeah, that's a formula that works right there. You bring a Babe, Pig in Mexico City, and Freaky Friday together, you have my brother the pig.
It was weird.
Babe, Pig in Mexico City.
I feel like we as a society had a moment where we really liked the transformation type of movie. We don't do that anymore. We don't have the transformation movies anymore.
Maybe its time has come and gone, but at the same time, I feel like it is a little bit of a timeless subgenre that you can get into.
Final review. Fight.
So why don't you go ahead, if you would do the honors of providing your honest logline for My Brother the Pig, followed by your popcorn points, followed by your general thoughts and reasoning behind it.
Sure. So my log line is this. When a nightmare of a child is turned into a pig, thanks to the negligence of a secret witch nanny, the nanny's sister and best friend must travel to Mexico to reverse the curse. I went ahead and gave this one 4.1 popcorns. It's a stale popcorn. So here's my thing with it. It's what I've been saying this whole time. It's a zero substance movie. The wrong people were the villain, right? Kathy was seen as the villain. But in reality, there were no heroes in this film. Everybody sucked. Kathy was the most relatable for me. I, too, again, would be super upset with the circumstances I was put through in this film and leading up to this film. Maybe Freud carried the film. He was maybe the best thing that happened. He was just the good comedic relief. Nobody learned any lessons. I'm assuming George is still just a little piece of shit, as he kind of proved towards the end of the movie. The nanny gets off free of charge for being a witch. That's never going to come up. The parents should know. The parents deserve to know that their nanny is a witch. The parents still suck. It's just all around empty calories. And so it's a 4.1 for me. It's a stale bag of popcorn. It's empty calories. You have nothing better to do. It's on TV. You don't want to watch it, but you'll just kind of eat it as you're sitting there. Zero substance, 4.1. And that might even be a little generous because I don't want to drag it too much. It's a kid's movie. It's a family film. It's not trying to be more than what it is, but it still could have done a lot better.
An honest review by Nick Goddamn Justice. So you are saying this did deserve to critically flop with that score?
I mean, critically flop. It deserved to have no critics watch it, I guess.
Which is what happened.
All right. Let's see what you have to say.
If I were to give this an honest log line, my honest log line for My Brother the Pig would be: an unholy concoction of 90s corporate American snacks awakens an ancient witchcraft magic, turning a little shit kid into a pig. And his sister, who hates him, has to take a road trip with their ridiculously attractive nanny and the smarty pants neighbor kid to Mexico City in hopes of changing him back. 2 roads to 1 destination there with our log lines.
Yeah.
And I gotta give this a 5.9 popcorn points. Should not have flopped. And I'll tell you why. You know what you signed up for when you selected a movie called My Brother the F***ing Pig. You saw the poster and read the logline. You knew what you were getting into. And here's my general thoughts on it. It's not a lot because this movie doesn't have a lot of substance. This movie is a bit of an anomaly. I'm not sure where it came from. I don't really know who greenlit it. You shed some light on its distribution problems. I'm surprised this didn't ruin some careers. I mean, maybe it did. Maybe what's his name? Nick Flacco, the George kid.
Yeah, Fuoco.
Nick Fuoco. I mean, he never had another job. Maybe that was his choice, but honestly, it couldn't take down Scarlett Johansson. It couldn't take down Eva Mendes. I can appreciate the bold slap in the face to mysterious magic transformation movies. If anything, I kind of saw this as a parody. It seemed like it was making a statement against transformation movies and a parody to that subgenre of movies. This is a family movie. What do you expect to happen from that? My Brother the Pig, it knows what it is. It knows it's a stupid concept because it's about a kid who gets turned into a pig by a concoction of frozen treats, of popsicles and Snickers. This is like a movie we would make. Now, there's a lot of irrational characters, but that's what I'm saying. I see this as a parody. And the more we deep dive into the psyche of this movie with the psychology of George, is he thinking like a pig? Is he thinking like a boy? Is everyone crazy? Is Kathy crazy? It's really like a dark thriller almost.
It should have been.
It keeps me engaged. I know what I signed up for. I call it 5.9 popcorn points above a 5.5, aka I bust this myth that is a flop in my eyes, baby.
First off, I have to disagree with you that it's a parody of it. This guy wrote it in 92. He liked the idea. He was super on board with transformations.
That's fine. And whatever his intentions were or not, I am saying I view this through my own personal eyes, my own individual self. I see this as a parody to transformation movies, which is why my intake and experience is a little bit more positive than most, because I know what I signed up for.
My only issue here is I hate the message. Shakes me to my core.
Which is why I call it a parody. It's not supposed to be taken for face value. Whether that was its intentions or not, that's what I'm calling it. Is it a good movie? Not really, but it's not a flop. We have hit the end of this pigtail, if you will. We will be sticking with the 90s next week and watching a movie with Bruce Willis.
It's Bruce Willis and an actress who has a red wig on in the film.
Okay, well, that's basically giving it away. We are heading gone.
Until next week, friends.
See y'all next week.